بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
سبيل الدموع سبيل مريح، تنهدى يا صاحي كي تستريح، وبث الدعاء الخفي الصريح، يسعك الفضاء الرحيب الفسيح. سبيل الدموع سبيل مريح، تنهدى يا صاحي كي تستريح، وبث الدعاء الخفي الصريح، يسعك الفضاء الرحيب الفسيح.
أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته, and welcome to a series of lectures on a very interesting topic both to Muslims and non-Muslims, and currently very topical, the issue and the concerns around integration and assimilation, of how the Muslim community within a Western setting can be true to their faith and also be true to their country. I hope over the next few episodes of this series to explore this, and my main focus is going to be on the Deobandi view within the British context, and we'll explore together these concepts of assimilation, integration, and then extremism and terrorism. It's very topical, it's on the minds and lips of many people, so it's important that we address this issue so both Muslims and non-Muslims can understand from this perception, or from this perspective. The focus of this series will be on a text, or on a book that I published a number of years ago, which is Muslims in Non-Muslim Lands, a Legal Study with Applications. And this was a 4-year study which I carried out in a university looking at this very same topic. And I hope within this series we'll be able to summarize some of the findings that I wrote in there. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Before we start into the lecture itself, I think it's worthwhile spending some time on the title, because it sets the framework for the lecture itself. We see the title quite a mouthful, trying to tick all the boxes, which is a British Deobandi view on assimilation, integration, hatred, extremism and terrorism. Why the use of the word British? Because as we'll see throughout this lecture, contextualizing or taking into consideration context is absolutely essential when reaching a legal position within any of the schools. And our focus in particular is going to be the Hanafi school. So British is our context, the British Isles, where we find ourselves in the UK. Deobandi. Okay, Deobandi, there's a couple of reasons why in particular our focus is on Deobandi. Firstly, because lately within the media, any affiliation towards the Deobandi or any mosque or madrasa who shows any affiliation is seen in a negative light. And that's because of the historical relationship between Britain and Deoband, particularly British involvement in India, because obviously Deoband is situated within India, and how that relationship played out. And it's assumed now, centuries later, that relationship is the same, but that's not really taking into consideration the flexibility and the nuanced approach that fiqh takes, and realizing going from a majority context, and when I speak of majority I'm talking about authority, to a minority context, and how the view changes or it doesn't. So why focus on Deobandi? Well, I did say there was 2 reasons. And the second reason is because Deobandi does a grand job, or the Deobandi way does a grand job in ensuring that Muslims maintain their identity. And the maslak, the methodology applied by the Deobandi approach, is to avoid assimilation. And before I go into too much detail into assimilation, I'll wait until the particular point is reached within the lecture. So those 2 points are essential. The point of the negative spotlight which any institute or individual associated with Deoband is under, and secondly, because the Deoband does an excellent job at maintaining Muslim identity. So it's not a new thing. It's a result of the efforts made by the greater powers, you could say, or by individuals in authority to remove the Islamic identity from Muslims. And the Deoband approach, the Deoband Maslak in particular, took a different approach, one of isolation within India, and has a different approach when we look within Britain. So there's a conflation amongst the academics and the media of associating Deoband with taking an anti-British position, an anti-British stance, and also arguing the case of isolation, which we'll come to. Now you might think, well, why haven't I squeezed isolation in the title? But I was running out of space. So this is going to be particularly the British Deobandi view for those two reasons. What are we going to be discussing today? Well, what we are going to be looking at is assimilation. And as I said, I'm not really going to go too much into describing this. We're also going to look at integration. And then leading on from that, we're going to explore where does the hatred come from, or this accusation of hatred. Where does the extremism come in? And then how do we lead on to the terrorism itself? Some sort of credentials there, but an important one for those of you who are observing and want to be involved or be made aware of anything else which is going on in terms of both research and articles from the Olive Foundation. You've got a Telegram link there, and other details will be available at the end of this video. So let's make a start in the lecture itself. What's the structure of the lecture? Well, the structure of the lecture is that we're going to explore, firstly, definitions. Okay, we're going to look at definitions. And it's important. I've made a number of points in the beginning of the lecture where I introduced certain concepts. And these concepts, as we saw earlier, these concepts mean different things to different people. So it's important that these are defined. And I will try to use definitions which are accepted by the masses, so I'm not making my own definitions as such. And then leading on from definitions, we will look at the Sharia. What is the Sharia? What is Islamic law? And I've used the word law here, but I'll explore that later. What does the role of context play? Clearly by my introduction, especially with the title, you've noticed that I've added an adjective in front of the word Deobandi, and the adjective is British, which clearly shows the multifaceted nature of this approach. And remember, all you want to do here is to use this word to mean those whose approach is to maintain a Muslim identity. That's really what it's about. I can't go into the history of Deoband and the geography and what it was trying to do for now, and there's many good books and lectures on that topic already. For now, it's an institute which has given birth to many more institutes across the globe, and really the key issue is to avoid assimilation. And depending on the circumstances they found themselves in, they've either adopted an isolationist approach or they've adopted an integration approach. And the reason why they've adopted one of those two approaches has been as a reaction to the circumstances they found themselves in. So let me just skip back to where I was introducing this role of context. We'll also look at political legal jurisdictions, because this, as I've mentioned a number of times, this multifaceted nature of fiqh takes into consideration the context a Muslim finds himself in, and also then this is looking at more at diyar, the concept of dar, the concept of a country, if I can use that word, a more modern term, but it reflects the same concept. So what is Britain? Because we've already mentioned how the Deobandi approach may have been in India because of the circumstances the Muslims found themselves in, where they were being occupied by an external power, and they were being forced to adhere and accept foreign rules to which they had not been privy to or given the opportunity to discuss and agree with or disagree with. Whereas Britain is a completely different scenario. Here the Muslims themselves have arrived in Britain by choice to better themselves, to better themselves both financially and in terms of education and in terms of opportunities. So would that mean the same ruling would apply as it did for the Deobandis within India as it would within Britain? Now clearly that's going to tease out those differences and hopefully bring to light that this context is a huge thing and the impact it has. We'll also then explore the concept of citizenship and contractual obligations. The concept of citizenship is fairly new. And what I mean by fairly new, what I mean is that national states and the power the state has and has developed over the last sort of couple of centuries in the East, but even more so, even longer in the West, is it's gone from being a facilitator, gone from being a means to draw resources together, to actually be quite an authoritative and powerful body as a nation state. And then we have this concept of citizenship, where each individual is expressing allegiance to this nation state. And what are these contractual obligations? Because for a Muslim also, there are certain contractual obligations that they are making in this particular state. But what does the Muslim, or anybody else for that matter, get in return for this contractual obligation? You know, what citizenship rights are there? You know, what liberties are there? What responsibilities does the Muslim have to be responsible for as being a citizen of a country in which he's decided to live in? And finally, as with most lectures, hopefully there will be a conclusion. Hopefully the conclusion will draw together what I've discussed over the lecture, these 3 lectures, and we'll be able to give some food for thought, but at the same time give direction, and also hopefully conclusively detail and conclusively state what the question that I posed, or what is the view of the British Deobandis within the setting they find themselves in. So, what's this research based on? Is this, you know, where does all this come from? Well, this was originally a 4-year study that took place at a university a number of years ago now, close to 6 years or so, and eventually it was published as a text by Islamic Text Society, and it was the book that I was holding in my hand when we introduced this lecture. It's called Muslims in Non-Muslim Lands, a Legal Study with Applications, and this explores what I'm hopefully trying to summarize for you today. But it's not just a 4-year study. As a Muslim living within Britain, my own identity that I have as a Muslim and as an Englishman, I've personally wanted to know how do I fit in, how do I engage, what limits are there any limits, how do I practice my religion in a setting, in a secular setting, and things of that nature. So really you could say it's a lifelong kind of vocation, and it's continued even beyond the production of that text, and to this day it's an area which I continue to research in. You'll notice also that there's a plan that I will do a more detailed series of lectures which will be based on my research directly, and these will be over a period of sort of 8 videos or so that inshallah ta'ala that I'm planning to hopefully do on the request of many individuals who are asking the same question of themselves in terms of how Muslims fit in within this new setting they find themselves in. And currently on Saturdays on Iqra TV, which is 819, channel 819 if I'm not mistaken, it's running on 5 till 6 o'clock on a weekly basis. So that's also those lecture series, but for those who are struggling to get access to them, then they just need to sort of wait a little bit, and they will get this up and coming video series on the Olive Foundation YouTube channel. definitions. It's very important that we define things. We define statements, we define concepts, we define words, so that we're all on the same page, so that we all understand each other, we all understand what we're saying. So it's important that I start looking at definitions. So assimilation, what am I referring to? Well, I plunged into the Oxford Dictionary looking for, a deep understanding of this word, and came back a little bit sort of not as content as I hoped I would be. And the reason for that is, once I find the word, is in the Oxford Dictionary it says it to take in and fully understand or information ideas. That's not what we're referring to here, but it says it of a society or culture to absorb and integrate people's ideas or culture. Now, the problem that I have with that definition is that it's including a word integrate, which I think is different, and I'm sure many others agree, or social scientists would accept, that integrate is very different than assimilate. So therefore I'm going to give you my understanding of this definition, assimilate, or my understanding of this word rather, or my definition of this word. Assimilate would mean that, and it's usually in the case of a minority, that a minority individual or a minority group enter into a larger group, and as a result their practices, their religion, their identity is diluted to such an extent that over a passage of time, maybe over a couple to 3 generations, there is no difference between the individual and the community that he or she has decided to move into. That's assimilation, ikhtilat tam, okay? Complete mixing, a melting pot, so to speak. And this is the concept. This is the view of assimilation, in which this individual no longer has any sort of identity left. Maybe in private circles he continues to. So in his private affairs, maybe worshipping or praying, he can continue to identify himself slightly different than anyone else. Now, obviously, assimilation has its limits as well. If the individuals are ethnically different, so for instance, they're from the South Asian area of the world, or they're from Africa, then they will not be able to assimilate fully in our context if we're looking at the British environment, because the British naturally Caucasian, white-skinned. So it's still going to stand out. The other area of assimilation obviously would be in terms of names, and you would see that the names would start to change over a period of time. So for Muslims anyway, because that's our topic for today, slowly Muslim names would no longer be used, which Muslim names tend to be based on nations or peoples who adopted Islam at the early stages. So we're talking about Persian names, we're talking about Arab names, and things of that effect. So they would slowly start to disappear. Dress obviously would be one of the first things that would disappear, because it's a public display of identity. And eventually what you'd find is that the individual would be no different, apart from the physical features which he can't change, he would be no different than those individuals that he has decided to live amongst. Now, you would find that the government, the country that's receiving these individuals, would prefer an agenda of assimilation. The reason being is it's a lot easier to manage. It's a lot easier to deal with when everybody is very much of the same. And everybody kind of accepts the way things are done, and there's less resistance then. And therefore assimilation is seen as one of the key approach that the government and its various bodies would like to apply. And this is argued that, and those who don't, it's argued against them now that the concepts like multiculturalism hasn't worked. And assimilation would have been the best approach that should have been taken. So rather than having translators in hospitals and schools and things of that nature, folks should have been sort of somewhat compelled and forced to learn English, and as a result now, people would have been fitting in better amongst one another. So it can be successful, assimilation, it can be successful as I've described, or on the other hand, it can lead to isolation. Now, why will it lead to isolation? Well, if the identity or if the description of this people is such that they hold it dear to their hearts, then there's only one reaction, and that reaction is that whenever we're in the public sphere, whenever we're getting involved publicly, then our identity is being challenged. So therefore, we don't get involved publicly. And you can see that this is the kind of the approach that you would have seen within India, that the Deobandi approach within India, which was that there was a serious push towards an aggressive policy by the British in India to try to challenge the Islamic or Muslim identity. And as a result, in order to safeguard the Muslim identity, in order to avoid assimilation, the Muslim community, as viewed through the Deobandi prism, opted for isolation. Why? This wasn't sort of something to take an aggressive stance, even though, arguably speaking, within the Indian context it's very different, because the British were an invading power, the British were an aggressive power who were looking to establish themselves on an alien land, and the individuals that were living within that land had every right to defend themselves. But they adopted, due to lack of resources, and to adopt an isolation attitude and separate themselves from wider society in order to refrain from being assimilated. And you will see numerous fatwa coming out from India around that sort of time, which describe things which nowadays we would find inappropriate. For instance, adopting certain practices, learning certain languages, and things of that nature. Why? Because the scholars in particular were very much concerned that any public engagement, any engagement within, according to sort of British culture, is going to eventually cause individuals to assimilate. But what's the problem with assimilating? You know, why not? Why can't we all just be together and, you know, be as one, and we can all get on well? The issue is that assimilation is a social setup, it's a social issue which goes about trying to get individuals to become similar and live close together and be as one. But one's social identity, and by extension national identity, does not answer all the questions that a Muslim has. For instance, a Muslim wants to know where he or she will go after they die. Now, you know, I can be assimilated to the max, you know, but that's not going to answer my question. I can become more and more, you know, inverted commas, British, but that's not going to answer my question as to whether where I go after I pass away, after I die. So it's these other issues, it's these other concerns which the Muslim needs answering and can't be answered through a social identity. It cannot be answered through that. So there's only one other option, and that's to find another identity which supports this individual, allows this individual to come to terms with themselves and be able to move on. Now, once these beliefs are accepted, the beliefs that there is a God, that his name is Allah, the belief that there was a prophet, and there were many prophets who came before him, and this Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave specific instructions, and those instructions were not just applicable to one's diet and worship, but also affected one's dress code, affected one's behavior, affected one's engagement with individuals around him or her. It affected literally everything about him, from tying his shoelace to, you know, involved in politics. But you know, I touch upon politics, and this is again when we speak about context, is how much those politics can play a part. But why is isolation a problem? Well, isolation can be problematic, but I will explore rather isolation in its place. So, in short, what I'm saying is that assimilation is not what the Muslim would want, and it would not be those groups and those individuals, and particularly as we're looking at it from the Deobandi perspective, who are keen on facilitating an identity to Muslims in order that they're not assimilated, and all those groups who adhere to the philosophy and the methodology of the Deobandi approach, is to avoid this assimilation. So that's not an answer. But well, okay, what's wrong with isolation? Well, we'll explore isolation as well. Well, you know, this lecture series is supposed to be giving answers as well as giving some raising some interesting questions. What's the alternative then? If we're not going to go for assimilation, we're not going to go for isolation, surely, that's it. Well, no, that's not it. There is something called integration, which is why I opted not to go for Oxford's definition of integration, because Oxford's definition of Oxford's definition of assimilation actually used integration to define itself, and they are not the same. They are definitely not the same. So let me see if I can find in Oxford Dictionary again, integration. So here we are. Integrate. To combine or be combined to form a whole, and bringing or come into equal participation in an institution or body. So that seems, number two, is the best, or the relevant translation rather, the relevant definition of this word integration, which is to bring or come into equal participation in an institution or body. So integration means equal participation, not at the expense of losing one's identity. It's not that it would not be equal participation. It would be unequal participation if the individual assimilated, because it would be basically the society or the government would be saying to him is that we can't accept you the way you are at the moment. So the only way, which means we can't integrate you, we can't accept you to come and sit around the table and agree with us until you remove those parts of your identity which we have a problem with, which happen to be this individual's faith. So if you give up those issues, the public display of your faith, then, we can be equal partners. But no, that's not. Integration is, as defined by the Oxford Dictionary, is to bring or come into equal participation in an institution or body. I can add to that definition, and I would add by saying that integration means to facilitate minorities or to facilitate groups of people within the larger setting or within the larger group of people, but giving them equal participation and respecting them for their differences. I'm not talking about law now, because there might be certain individuals who hold beliefs and who hold practices which have now become illegal. That's not what I'm referring to, because that's the law, and we don't want to confuse social concepts with law. Law is something separate which we'll touch upon later. I'm just talking for now about accepting an individual as an equal partner, rather than feeling that the differences which he or she possesses are seen as problematic, but rather the differences he or she possesses are seen as productive and adds to the community and brings a different voice. Now, I did say that isolation is a problem, and when community are forced to assimilate, or the pressure upon them is so much, then they can take a very much an isolation attitude. And this is why when media want to speak to certain schools, when media want to speak to certain imams or scholars, when media want to speak to certain charities, when media wants to speak to certain madrasas, and they say, well, nobody wasn't available for comment, you can already see that that's a kind of a step which the community is taking with the media, where they feel they can't trust the media is there to exploit them, or kind of take an Islamophobic attitude towards them, and anything they can and say will be used against them, quite literally. So as a result, mum's the word, best not to say anything, at least then you're safe, because anything you can say will be used against you, and it usually is. So you can start to see that the community is being kind of forced, by the media in particular, to take an isolationist attitude. And I'm not saying that it's all parts of the media, I'm generalizing there. I'm talking about the loud parts within the media, and those who are exercising some influence. So what's the problem with isolation, and how does it come about? Well, first of all, isolation comes about due to fear. The first issue that the community feels is fear. And when they feel fear, they feel that when you're in sizable numbers, then you can protect yourself. And what is it they're trying to protect? Well, again, I've mentioned to you, they're trying to protect identity, something which they hold dear to them. Why can't they give up their identity? I've already explained that. Because of the belief system, because they're Muslims, because they identify themselves as Muslims. The belief system that they believe in then has ramifications into average daily life as well. Dress code, diet, behavior, and everything else that goes with that. So they're protecting their identity. So when we do look again about, and you know, many social scientists rather have looked at and researched at ethnic minorities and have come back with kind of quite sort of scary Armageddon type prophecies that more and more communities are separating. Well, the question is, what's causing that separation? And to put the blame solely at the door of the Muslims or the minority is absolutely incorrect. You've got to ask the question is, what's leading to that, for that to happen? Why is that occurring? And that's which will answer the issue of isolation and why communities are doing that. And remember that there's also the concepts of white flight and things of that nature, but that's way beyond the remit of these lectures. So it's protecting identity. It's within this sort of area where potentially then hatred can come about. So where communities aren't mixing, where communities are not trusting one another, where communities are looking at each other with suspicious eyes, then naturally, and where communities don't get to know one another, you start to see concepts like hatred coming about, and this is an opportunity where individuals of an extremist view can start to plant the seeds of hatred and use media and use whatever's going around and start to say, well, look, you know, this is what's going on and whatever else. And some of it, you see, is based on truth, especially if there's a very aggressive assimilation policy being pushed through, whether within the schools or whether within the education or employment environment, or even within, you know, everyday life, banning certain types of dress, ridiculing certain types of dress. So this is pushing, and this is fertile ground for those individuals then who want to start to sow the seeds of hatred within communities. This then obviously naturally leads on to extremism, because this hatred then brings about a view that, which is an extreme view, a view on the fringes of the community. And remember, this is very much on the extreme fringes of the community, and it's a very small group of individuals. And then you would expect, if there are any acts of terrorism, that they would come from this group, and that's where they would take place from. But you can see how I have simplified it for the purpose of the lecture, and I've also looked at the general effects and the general pathway rather than going to a more detailed and sort of nuanced approach. Sharia Islamic law. Now, before we touch upon that, that's something which I will leave for part 2 of the series of these lectures. So I hope you can join me again, inshallah, in part 2. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
كي تستريح وبث الدعاء الخفي الصريح يسعك الفضاء الرحيم